Hello, and today I'm going to be showing you a scenario where Russia joins the Central Powers and Austria-Hungary is in the Entente. Now, why wasn't this the case? It's fairly simple. Germany initially tried to ally both Austria-Hungary and Russia, but sadly that wasn't possible due to conflicting views in the Balkans. Eventually, they chose Austria and the sides for World War I formed. But what if that hadn't been the case? What if Germany instead chose to side with the Russians before the war? What if they decided that a Russian alliance is more valuable than an Austrian one, leading to these being the core sides having a Franco-Austrian Entente and a Germo-Russian Central Powers? What would the war end up looking like? Well, today we're going to find that out and maybe even look a bit into the future of what would happen. Immediately, I don't know what would start this war. There's plenty of things that could start it. If we look at French colonies, it would still be a contest, at least for now. It would all depend on if Britain joins the war, and frankly, in this timeline, the odds of them joining have just tripled. If Germany invades Belgium or not does not matter. They already joined the Entente in our history, and the only reason they wouldn't was because of Russia. The two nations they feared the most were Germany and Russia. So with both of them in the Central Powers, Great Britain would no doubt join the Entente very, very early on, complicating the entire colonial war. As you probably know, Britain does have by far the largest colonial empire in history, and at this time, I'm not really going to be covering the colonies much simply because, well, they don't matter. Obviously, the British and the French are going to have an advantage there, and they're going to win eventually. But let's start off in the European War, where the Germans would have a fairly easy time pushing into Austria. Much of Austria's population would want to join Germany. They are German, and they wouldn't really want to fight them. Meanwhile, in the south, I have no doubt that eventually Italy would join. If you don't know, they had claims on France and Austria in our timeline, but chose to go after the Austrian claims. Here, they can side with the Germans and the Russians and get basically all the land they could ever hope for. Meanwhile, this war may have even started over Serbia. Serbia attacks the Archduke, Russia joins to help them, except here, France joins the Austrians instead of the Germans helping them out. The French are the ones who give them the blank check. Who knows how the war would start? That's just how I'm going to have it happen, and these would be the sides either way. However, in this world, the Serbs may actually have a successful offensive into Austria. Look at the poor Austrians over here. They are completely surrounded. Even the defendable front against the Italians would quickly start to fall apart. As I said, even if Germany didn't invade Belgium, the UK would join. I still see it as likely that they would, though. It was very helpful, not just because they neared Paris, and in this world, they may even do worse, as they are dedicating a lot of forces to the Austrian front. Meanwhile, the British would join in sooner and be more prepared to counter these German actions. However, taking control of even just this small amount of northern French industry, this right here is probably about 10% of their industry, if I had to guess. What they took in our timeline, which was somewhere around there, was 25%. This area also houses a lot of their steel, a lot of their coal, a lot of their resources in general. It's necessary to take that if they want to win. Meanwhile, in Austria, no doubt about it, they're crushing in. The Russians, whilst fighting the Germans at the same time, well, maybe they wouldn't push past the mountains, but whilst fighting the Germans in real life, they were still making advances into Galicia. Here, that would just be quickly sped up. And it's also likely that Romania would join in, completely encircling the Austrians, and they have zero chance of surviving. They're just trying to last as long as possible to help out the French in the west. As for the Ottomans, if the war just started like this, I could see them going out either way. But if the German-Russian alliance had lasted longer, 20 years before this, the Germans would have probably never invested into Ottoman relations. So I'm going to have them joining the Entente against the Russians. That would leave Bulgaria in a similarly tough position. They might be more inclined to work with the Russians, but at the same time, they do have terrible relations with the Serbians, the Romanians. I'm going to leave them neutral for now because I could see them going either way. But, I don't know. We'll see what side they do eventually join. The Austrians do desperately need them, though. As soon enough, all of Bohemia, all of Galicia, all of Transylvania, even Bosnia, it's all fallen apart. They are completely surrounded, and with Italy and Montenegro on the Adriatic, they are cut off from all Allied supply, Allied forces. They don't stand a chance at all. That is why I think that it's likely Britain will give massive promises. All of Macedonia, pretty much everything that Bulgaria could possibly want would be promised. And it's likely the British would also give them a ton of money to join in on their side. They would need this if they even want a chance to defeat the Austrians. The Bulgarians would immediately start making progress. Meanwhile, while the Russians were focused on Armenia in Turkey. However, the Ottomans wouldn't have to worry about Egypt or Kuwait with the British, and in fact may be getting some British aid to fight in Armenia. So who knows, it could be a much tougher fight than it was in our world. The Serbians, likewise, would also be putting up a better fight against the Bulgarians. We saw them get overrun quickly, but that was because they were fighting a much stronger Austria-Hungary. Here, Austria-Hungary is a guaranteed collapse. All they have to do is wait. Meanwhile, in the west, the Germans might try something. I doubt they would make much progress, especially considering how much they're focusing on Austria-Hungary. But the fact is, they are in the better position here. The British blockade would still be going on in the North Sea, but Russian grain would be kind of saving them, feeding their population. And to be fair, without the Germans sending Lenin to Russia, and with the Russians not really having to worry about losing any land or losing any battles, I don't think they'd fall into civil war here at all. They'll probably survive the whole war. And that war won't be lasting much longer as Austria-Hungary capitulates. And whilst Bulgaria attempts to consolidate the Balkans, their only real shot is holding out in the Macedonian mountains and along the Danube, because in a fair fight, they're on their own. The Russians would be helping out the Romanians and the Serbians. Meanwhile, we can say at least half of their attention would be put on Armenia, absolutely demolishing the Ottoman efforts in the region. Meanwhile, in the west, the Italians would be seeing maybe some minor gains, not much though. I mean, they're the Italians. You can't expect them to do much, other than a few pestering moves, which would likely get beaten back almost immediately. Meanwhile, the Germans would actually be doing something, crushing into northern France, capturing even more of their industry, pushing past Alsace, and overall starting to win the war. The Americans here may be starting to consider joining soon, but given that the Germans are already winning the war in Europe, they really have no reason to send something like the Zimmermann telegram or anything of the sort, so the Americans aren't given a reason to join. The Germans would then continue, just slowly making progress into northern France, whilst the Italians may even get a successful offensive around Nice if they're lucky. In Africa, despite the Germans doing better in this world, fact is they're not going to hold on to all of this. With any luck, they can have a small stronghold in Cameroon, and very likely would hold on to major portions of their East African colony in Tanzania as well. The Italians would be struggling. The British have to focus on France, so it's likely they won't take all Italian colonies, especially in Libya, where the Italians can easily get troops as it's very close to their mainland. Meanwhile, the British have to contend the entire German fleet up in the North Sea, so they wouldn't have many resources to stop those Italian moves. Moving down to the Balkans, there's Greece. Their king is in favor of Germany, and their population wants to crush the Ottomans, so although the British might try and pressure them against it, I think they would join the Central Powers. This would completely destroy the Bulgarian offensive and start to put pressure on their south. It's very possible that Bulgaria would do a similar thing as in our timeline, and that despite not having really lost much, they would surrender, hoping for a lenient peace treaty where they wouldn't really lose much. Meanwhile, the Russians would have, demolished the Turks. The Ottomans really stand no chance. Even against a small portion of the Russian army, they were losing in our timeline. And now, with upwards of 50-60% of the Russian army focusing on the Ottomans, they stand absolutely no chance. The Russians may even reach the Mediterranean, completely cutting the Ottomans in half and securing them to a loss. They would likely be the next to surrender. With two of their allies gone and the French slowly falling back, the capture of Paris may just be enough to get the Entente to surrender. If this had happened with a regular Schlieffen, I don't think it would have been enough. They could go back to Bordeaux and hold until the Americans got there. But with the Americans not joining in, the Germans completely secure on the Eastern Front, and all of their other allies besides Britain dead, I think it would be likely that the Allied powers would soon surrender, giving up to the German, Russian, Italian Central Powers. As for the peace treaty, Germany would likely take parts of Alsace, but most importantly, this region right here of northern France. As I mentioned earlier, it has a major portion of French industry and a lot of their steel production. They would also take the defensible positions in Belgium up to the river, which I forgot the name of. Meanwhile, considering how total their victory was, they can probably push Belgium up along the coast as well. Italy would be given basically all of their claims on all of their borders. Nice, Savoy in the west, and in the east, they would only be given South Tyrol, not the north, as that was mainly German, and the Germans would want it. And as I said, the Germans wouldn't just take that, they would take all of Austria, and quite possibly all of Bohemia as well. I mean, who would really stop them? The Russians? They can't do much. Although it is possible that the Germans would set up a sort of semi-independent Bohemia. Something like that. I'm not going to draw the exact Sudeten borders. You probably know what I mean by that. Meanwhile, the Russians... come on. The Russians would take all of Galicia. And probably... maybe even a bit more. I mean, they aren't really going to get much anywhere else, so they should push their borders as much as possible. The Romanians may not even get all of Transylvania, only receiving the south parts, as they really weren't necessary. They kind of just joined in on their own. The Russians didn't want them, the Germans didn't want them, and they would much rather have a stronger, more allied Hungary in the future. The Serbians would still gain all of Croatia and southern Hungary, practically exactly what they got in our timeline, being allowed to form Yugoslavia. The one big difference is this massive Hungary right here, which would most likely become allied to the Germans, although I could see them installing a Russian prince as well. Down in Bulgaria, nothing much would change from what they got in our timeline. The Romanians wouldn't take anything, the Serbs would just take a few minor border territories that I can't even show on this map, and the Greeks would take their southern coast. The Greeks would also take much of Turkey. However, given that that Germany doesn't care, Britain can't do anything about it, and the Russians really want Constantinople, they're probably going to get it. Meanwhile, they're also going to seize all of Turkish Armenia, and possibly even more, giving them an absurd amount of land in the Ottoman East. In the south, it's even possible that the British would betray them and take a lot of Ottoman territories in Arabia, as it's more worth it for the British to control these lands on their own, especially after they're forced to give up lands elsewhere. That's essentially what's going to happen to the Ottomans. They're going to be left as a little state. Oh wait, I almost forgot. They're also going to lose a bunch of lands to the Greeks, and their southern coast to the Italians. Apparently it can get worse, and now their tiny little state is even smaller and even weaker. The rest of Bulgaria would be left alone, and Hungary would be technically independent, even though they would not be an ally. Rest of France, same thing, technically independent, but it's possible some restrictions are placed on their army, and almost guaranteed that they'll have to pay some war reparations. In Africa, first things first, Italian expansion in the north. They would take all Libyan lands they got in our timeline, and their most important expansion on the continent, annexing all of Tunisia from the French. They had wanted this for years, it was one of their main goals. They may also gain some slight British desert, maybe even some land from Egypt. It's not really crucial, but you know what? Let's give them a bit of land anyways. The British are really just not in a good position here. They can't stop it. The Italians would also seize way more of Kenya than they did in our timeline. The British did give them some, looking about like that. Here they would double that land. Meanwhile, the rest of Uganda and Kenya would be given to the Germans. They would also gain all of French Central Africa, and actually, probably not. Would they get Zambia? No, I don't think they would. It's simply too much, especially considering that the British still have the stronger navy and are in a fairly good position. They probably wouldn't give that up. We can go ahead and color this in, as that is the end result for Africa and for the continent. The Germans have established their Middle Africa. They always do that when they win. It was their colonial goal pretty much from the start. The only thing that might not be guaranteed is the annexation of Uganda and Kenya, as like I said earlier, the British still have their navy and are still mostly intact, so if they really wanted to keep fighting, they very easily could. And they could starve the Germans, destroy German shipping for years to come. Nothing they can do about it. Here I'm going to give it to them, but it's possible that doesn't happen. The Italians gaining Tunisia is guaranteed. Their lands I gave them against Egypt probably wouldn't actually happen. I just wanted to make Italian Libya a tiny bit bigger, you know? Give the Italians an actual fighting chance in the future, especially because with the British blockade, their economy would now be even worse than it was in our timeline. To make up for this, the British, no punishment on their mainland. Most of the French colonial empire, fine. British, besides losing Kenya and Uganda, well, actually, they would expand. By taking those Arabian territories, the British colonial empire would actually manage to expand after the war. Meanwhile, the Germans would likely take southern Papua and may also take French Indochina. This would allow them to start to influence southern China into the future. As previously, they really only had a tiny little sphere in the north, nothing compared to what they can now. The rest of these lands would now be going to the Central Powers. Of course, Germany establishes their control in the west. I mean, completely neutering France. They can't stand up to any German attacks in the future. Now that they control the Ardennes, the Belgians can't really stop them from invading. And with the coastal strip they gave to Belgium, they can also start to pressure the British home islands, even during peace times. They would create this mildly independent Bohemia, which may not be realistic, but they don't really want to deal with pressing it, and, I mean, they just want to look like the good guys, you know? They gotta keep the US happy. So far, the US stayed out of the war, but if World War II does break out, they want to make sure the US likes them, and that they continue trading with them, give them loans, etc. Serbians, pretty much the same as in our timeline, unite Yugoslavia. The Romanians get a much worse deal, though. When they fought in our World War I, despite losing, they were given Bessarabia and all of Transylvania. Here, they're not given either. They don't get any of Bessarabia, and they only get the southern parts of Transylvania. They are really, really just screwed over in the peace deal, you know? They don't get much at all, not nearly as much as they had hoped for. And they may be a tiny bit bitter against the Hungarians and whoever supports them in the future. With this Russian expansion to Armenia, I think I'm done. Oh, and Canada is of course not puppeted, not quite. The Russians would probably start to distance themselves from Germany after the war. I mean, their alliance isn't really secured in any way, and now that Russia has expanded to the south and into Austria, their only real enemy left is Germany itself. They would probably take Serbia with them, and may strike up an alliance with Bulgaria and possibly with Hungary. Romania and Hungary are kind of opposites here, so if Germany gets a Romanian alliance, it's very likely that they don't get a Hungarian one, and if they get a Hungarian alliance, then the Romanians would probably side with the Russians. Here I'm going to have the Romanians on the German side, as they also want Bessarabia, which is kind of in a separate area. As for the Italians, I will keep them aligned with the Germans. I mean, the Germans just gave them practically everything they could ever hope for, and in the near future, within their next 10 years, I could see them invading and annexing Ethiopia. Now that they have a ton more land in the Horn of Africa, it would be easier for them to do so. The Greeks may also stay aligned with the Germans, or just go independent, either or, really. The Greeks don't matter all too much, but with the hope of taking Constantinople from the Russians, they're going to stay aligned to Germany. Here we have the new German state, probably even stronger than in a World War I victory of our timeline, as while they're missing their eastern lands, those are hard to control, and if they had actually gotten them in our timeline, it probably would have ended badly. In this world, they have trade with Russia, which will get them those resources, and they've actually managed to unite most Germans by taking Austria, South Tyrol, the Sudetenland, etc. Meanwhile, France, their main enemy, crippled. Russia, somewhat economically dependent, especially as Germany would probably be the one loaning them money in this timeline rather than the French, leaving a lot of Russian industry under German influence or total German control. Now, what are future wars here? What would a World War II look like? Because let's be honest here, the Germans aren't done yet. They just won a major war, and considering what the German elites and what the German leadership was thinking at the time, they were probably thinking soon enough it would be their best chance to invade and crush the Russians. That alliance was never supposed to stick, just like it didn't stick in 1941. So what would that future war look like? You know what? I'm gonna just show it to you, leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger. We're gonna have the Italians invading Yugoslavia and the Germans attacking the Russians. The Hungarians would join in against the Romanians, the Bulgarians against the Romanians, and the Greeks. Meanwhile, the Turks would, I could see them going either way, but I'm gonna have them siding with the Germans in return for the Italian southern coast, which Germany would force them to give back. They may even be given back Istanbul if they win the war. Between them and Greece, it's a toss-up really, but I'd give it to Turkey. Meanwhile, the French would also see this as their best opportunity to retake their lands from the Germans after having lost the previous war, but having no real defenses and Belgium under German control, the French wouldn't last long. And the Russians, who are mildly economically dependent on the Germans and very, very unstable in Poland, would probably start losing lands as well. As you can see, this is quite the German victory. They're aligned in the south. If they manage to win this World War II, they are in a very good position to dominate in the future, especially as they've had time to integrate Austria and would now be in a better position to occupy all of Western Russia. With that, I do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.